At our anniversary dinner, my husband lifted his glass with a grin and joked, 8 years wasted on a gold-digging nobody. The table sat stunned for a split second, then burst into laughter, right up until I quietly pushed a folder across to him. Funny, I said, because this fake prenup? It means you walk away with nothing. And those flirty messages you sent to your sister's friend? I just shared them with everyone you know. The lawyers showed up with divorce papers before dessert hit the table. But that wasn't even the biggest twist. Richard had no idea I understood the difference between a legal tax write-off and straight-up tax evasion. He'd talk about fudging expenses while I stood at the counter making his coffee, like I wasn't even there. He never noticed the way I angled my phone to record his every word as I smiled and nodded like the sweet, clueless wife. You wouldn't get it, Susan, he'd say, dripping with condescension that had only gotten worse over the years. Your literature degree's great for writing the stories, but this is real business. And I'd smile, playing the role to perfection. For years, I kept up the act, the supportive wife who traded her big dreams for homemaking. The books lining my shelves helped sell his version of me, a woman too dreamy to grasp the realities of his financial empire. But here's the thing Richard missed: literature taught me to pay attention, to catch patterns, and to spot the little signs that reveal who someone really is. Early on, the way he brushed me off was subtle. A smug smile when I asked about work. Talking to me like I was a child when he explained things. I saw what it led to. Once he assumed I wasn't smart enough to understand, he stopped being careful. By our 3rd anniversary, he was leaving sensitive financial documents out in the open. By year 4, he'd take calls about shady deals right in front of me while I folded laundry nearby. Don't worry about her, he'd say. Susan's too busy with her book club to catch on. At first, his arrogance stung. But then I realized something: if he thought I wasn't a threat, I could watch him without raising suspicion. So, I started a quiet little project, an email account where I stored photos of documents, notes about conversations, and anything else that seemed off. At the time, I wasn't planning anything big. I just couldn't stand him thinking I was as dumb as he believed. Then came the shift. Year ago he left his laptop open while he jumped in the shower. A message popped up from someone named Carolyn. The preview said enough: last night was amazing. Can't wait to see you again when she's at her parents'. My hand shook as I clicked it open. There she was, Carolyn Baker. His sister's friend since childhood. The same woman who hugged me at holidays, while sleeping with my husband. I scrolled through months of texts, each one more disgusting than the last. I screenshot everything, filed it away, and closed the laptop. When he came out of the bathroom, I greeted him with the same practiced smile I always wore. But inside, something had shifted. The notes I'd been keeping were evidence. Several days later, I reached out to Margaret Harper, a college acquaintance turned divorce and financial crimes attorney. We met up for coffee like old friends catching up, but behind the smiles, I was testing the waters. I asked her what she thought were innocent questions, about prenups, about what counts as financial misconduct, about recording conversations. She looked at me sideways, but answered each question. Those meetups slowly turned into planning sessions, strategic chats. Margaret never pushed, and I never admitted what I was really doing. Not until I showed her a transcript of Richard talking about hiding assets. That's when she closed her notebook and looked me square in the eye. If you dealing with stuff like this, she said, low and serious, it's better be real careful. This isn't just divorce material. We're talking criminal territory. That talk changed everything. Margaret started helping me organize my evidence, telling me what would matter in court, and what might interest the feds. She even introduced me to a forensic accountant. His job was digging into Richard's records. And that's when we found it. The prenup I signed had been tampered with after I added my signature. Hidden clauses snuck in, ones that would have left me with absolutely nothing. It was slick, almost invisible. But once someone knew what to look for, it was obvious. This isn't just shady, Margaret said. It's illegal. The whole prenup is invalid. After that, I doubled down. I perfected the role of the sweet, clueless wife while secretly setting the stage to blow up his entire world. I even bought tiny recording devices, stuff he'd never notice. I made sure every shred of evidence was backed up in several places: hard drives, cloud storage, even a hidden folder on a work laptop I never used. I'd taught myself the precise legal names for all of Richard's financial sleight of hand, and I waited. The perfect moment is anniversary dinner, the over-the-top event Richard insisted on throwing at the swanky downtown restaurant he loved to show off. He invited about 30 people. Mostly his business contacts, a few friends, and just enough of my family to make it look balanced. The invitations had gone out weeks in advance. The night before the dinner, I laid out my outfit, sea-wave-colored dress Richard once said made me look like a faculty wife. Into my clutch went Margaret's business card and a small thumb drive packed with 8 years' worth of truth. The next morning, I was set to file a report with the IRS whistleblower office, neatly written, fully sourced, ready to make someone's week over there. Tonight, Richard would lift his glass and toast to our picture-perfect marriage. And I'd finally stop pretending to be the quiet, good-natured wife he'd convinced everyone I was. Oddly enough, the morning felt calm. Richard had already left for the office. "I've taken care of everything," he'd said earlier, "just show up and look pretty." I arrived at the restaurant 40 minutes early. The maitre d' spotted me right away. "Mrs. Thompson, your husband's arranged a beautiful evening," he said with a grin. He led me to the Purple Rose room, the private space Richard had reserved for the occasion. Soft light from crystal chandeliers shimmered over the table, which was dressed in white flowers and silver accents. Richard and me seated at the heart of it all. I made a slow walk around the table, taking in every detail. His business people were grouped close to him on the right. My family, almost as an afterthought, were tucked away at the far ends. I slipped the folder into the drawer of the side table next to my seat. A final glance at my phone confirmed Margaret's arrival for 8 p.m. sharp. My messages were ready to go, queued up with a single tap. 8 years of playing along ended tonight. Guests started arriving. Richard's parents came first. "You look lovely, dear," his mom said, already scanning the room for someone more important. His dad barely acknowledged me, heading straight to the bar. Then my sister Linda showed up with her husband. She hugged me tight and whispered, "You okay?" I gave her hand a squeeze. She was probably the only one in that room who could sense that something in me had changed. Then Richard walked in, flanked by his usual crew, all of them laughing too hard at something that probably wasn't that funny. He was dressed to impress, confident in his tailored suit, wearing the smug grin of someone who thought nothing could touch him. He found my eyes and gave me that same condescending smile he'd worn for years, half loving, half dismissive. "There's my beautiful wife," he said, crossing the room to kiss my cheek. "Always on time, always flawless." His hand rested possessively on my waist as he leaned in and whispered, "I've arranged for the Thompson account to close tonight. Edward's here, he'll sign after dessert." I nodded like I was impressed. But I already knew that account was one of his pet projects for cooking the books. It was already documented and reported. Dinner unfolded with the kind of choreographed elegance Richard loved. Before dessert, his partner Frank tapped his glass. "I think it's time for a toast to the happy couple." Richard stood, champagne in hand. The room quieted, and his smile turned razor-sharp. I knew that look. It meant he was about to show off. 8 years ago, he began, I made what my friends called the safest bet of my life. The room gave a polite chuckle. Married the quiet literature teacher, more into Virginia Woolf than reality. I kept my smile in place, even as a few guests glanced around, visibly uneasy. My colleagues warned me it might be limiting, being with someone so wrapped up in fiction. He waved his arm casually, as if dismissing the whole idea. But I saw something different. A woman who wouldn't question my business. Who'd enjoy the nice life I gave her and leave the big decisions to me. Silence spread like a cold draft. Even his buddies looked uneasy. "So here's to 8 years wasted on a gold-digging nobody," he said with a laugh that tried, and failed to sound like a joke. Turns out, my simple wife was my greatest investment. A few strained laughs followed. My sister was fuming, and even his mother looked uncomfortable. Richard sat down, clearly satisfied with himself. That was my cue. I calmly opened the drawer and pulled out the folder. "I'd like to respond to that lovely toast," I said, my voice carrying easily through the stunned room. Richard's smirk didn't fade as I stood up. "I've been quiet these fires, that's true," I said, sliding the folder across the table. "But not for the reasons you think." He glanced at the folder and chuckled. "What's this, sweetheart? Anniversary gift? Maybe save it for later." "Oh no," I said. "This can't wait." I looked him right in the eye. "It's funny you mentioned assets, because this prenup? The one you forged after I signed it? It means you walk away with absolutely nothing." Richard's face went pale the second he opened the folder. Side-by-side copies of the prenup, mine and the one he doctored, stared up at him, with forensic notes detailing every tampered clause. "And since we're on the subject of assets," I added, pulling my phone from my clutch, "those texts between you and Carolyn?" I tapped a button. They just went out to everyone in this room. Like clockwork, phones started buzzing. Heads tilted down. Photos and messages. Undeniable time-stamped proof. "What the hell have you done?" Richard hissed, half rising from his seat, jaw clenched. "Exactly what you never thought I was capable of," I said, keeping my voice calm. The energy in the room shifted instantly. Richard's mom stared at her phone, horrified. His dad turned away, disgust plain on his face. My sister had moved behind me now, her hand steady on my shoulder like an anchor. Richard looked around the table for support, but found none. "These messages are dated," I said. "And they include your location data. Funny how many of your late nights at the office were actually spent at Carolyn's apartment." Frank, one of his closest partners, had already slid his chair away from him, studying the folder like it had just caught fire. "Richard," he said, his voice cold, "tell me you didn't actually alter a legal document." Before Richard could open his mouth, the door to our private dining room creaked open. Margaret stepped inside, heels clicking against the polished floor. Two of her colleagues followed, briefcases in hand. "Perfect timing," I said, smiling slightly. "The lawyers are here. Just in time for dessert." Margaret approached the table like she owned the place. The room had gone dead silent, except for the faint classical music still playing in the background. Richard's expression twisted when he recognized her. He said, "You're that tax attorney from the charity gala, the children's hospital event." Margaret offered him a polite smile. "Among other things, yes." She set a leather portfolio down in front of me, not him. "All prepped and ready, just like you asked," Margaret said, sliding the divorce papers toward me. "All the evidence has been filed with the right agencies." Richard lunged for the folder, but Edward, another partner, caught his arm mid-reach. "Don't make this worse," Edward warned, his face pale. He glanced between his phone and the prenup copies. "This is ridiculous," Richard said, turning toward the table, trying to rally anyone still willing to listen. "Whatever she thinks she's found, it's all out of context. She doesn't know the first thing about how a business operates." "Is that right?" Margaret replied, pulling out another document. "Then maybe you'd care to explain the context of this conversation, March 11th, when you told your CFO to adjust the numbers for the quarterly report." She pulled another paper from her briefcase. "Or this email chain, where you outlined a plan to create fake invoices for services that never existed?" The blood drained from his face. "You recorded me? That's illegal." "Actually," I said softly, "this state only requires one-party consent. You'd know that if you'd ever actually listened when I talked about my research. For 2 years, I'd been floating fictional scenarios that mirrored his real crimes. Watching his reactions. Letting him teach me what not to do. Letting him show me exactly what laws he thought he could skirt." "You were writing about me?" he asked, voice cracking with disbelief. Not at first, I said. But you turned out to be a pretty fascinating case study in fraud. Just then, the dessert cart appeared at the door. The poor server hesitated, eyes wide. Margaret gave a little wave. Go ahead and bring it in. We're just finishing up some paperwork. Right on cue, Richard's lawyer, Tom Reynolds, burst through the doors, breathing hard like he'd sprinted from the parking lot. Don't sign anything, he said, hurrying toward our table. Bit late for that, Margaret said coolly. But your client might want to hear your advice on the ongoing IRS investigation. What IRS investigation? Tom blinked, completely thrown. I looked Richard square in the eyes. The one triggered by the whistleblower report I filed 2 months ago. All those nights I told him I was on the phone with my sister. I was actually working with a special agent in the Financial Crimes Division. Richard's face turned a sickly gray. Just then, the chocolate fondant was set down between us like nothing unusual was happening. Edward suddenly pushed back from the table. I can't be part of this, he said, already reaching for his coat. A few others followed, some offering awkward excuses, most just avoiding Richard's eyes. You can't just walk out, Richard snapped. You're in this too. We've worked together for years. That's exactly why I'm leaving, Edward said. And why you'll hear from my lawyer tomorrow. While Richard sat there, watching his business relationships unravel, I felt oddly calm. Richard's mom stepped forward, her face tight with emotion. I'd like to understand what's going on, she said, looking me straight in the eye. I kept my tone even. Your son falsified financial records. He evaded taxes. He even changed our prenup after I signed it. And he's been having an affair for over a year now. She unclasped her pearl necklace, his gift to her, and placed it on the table. I believe this is tied to his business, not something I want any part of. Then she left with her husband close behind. Richard turned back to me, angry now. You spent these years lying? No, I said. I spent these years in a lie. Off to the side, I could hear his lawyer, Tom, whispering urgently. Words like damage control and injunction floated over. The rest of the guests looked lost, uncertain whether to stay or leave. My sister Linda pulled up a chair beside me. I always thought he was a jerk, she said, keeping her voice low. But I didn't see this coming. For the first time that night, the weight of it all hit me. My hand shook slightly as I picked up my water glass. I've been carrying it for so long, I said. Why didn't you tell me? She asked. I couldn't risk it. He had to believe I was exactly who he thought I was. Richard straightened his tie and came over to me. We need to talk. Alone, he said. Margaret stepped in before I could answer. No. Anything you need to say now goes through legal channels. This isn't your business, he answered, then turned to me. Susan, think about what you're doing. We've been married 8 years. Are you really going to throw it all away over a mistake? His voice had that tone, the one he always used when he wanted control. And for a split second, I felt that old instinct to stay quiet. Then I remembered what he said during his toast. 8 years wasted on a gold-digging nobody. There's no mistake, I said. And I'm done pretending. He leaned in close. You think this show makes you powerful? I built everything we have. When this falls apart, you'll have nothing. I already had nothing, Richard. Now I finally know what I'm worth. I looked him right in the eye. He'd never seen me like this. You'll regret this, he said. I only regret not doing it sooner. Across the room, the rest of Richard's business partners wore the expressions of men realizing their allies might suddenly become threats. What began as a polished anniversary celebration had quickly unraveled into damage control. Then, out of nowhere, my brother-in-law John, who'd always kept pretty quiet around Richard, walked over with a fresh glass of wine. Thought you might need this, he said, setting it down in front of me. I looked up at him. I always thought you knew, I said. That I wasn't who Richard made me out to be. For what it's worth, John said, I always believed you were the smartest person in any room Richard walked into. You never said anything, I replied, not accusing, just stating the truth. John nodded slowly. I told myself it wasn't my place. I see now that I was wrong. All around us, people spoke in low, tense voices. That's when Richard's phone rang. It was a tone I recognized, one he used only for his executive assistant. He looked at the screen and paled as he answered. What do you mean they're there now? He asked. No, don't let them into anything. I'm coming. He ended the call and stood, eyes darting around like he was looking for an exit. I need to get to the office, he said, rushing to grab his coat. What is happening? His lawyer asked, sharp and already suspicious. There are federal agents at the building, Richard muttered. That got everyone's attention. The last few guests still hanging around suddenly had somewhere else to be. 2 more men slipped out without saying a word. For the first time in all the years I'd known him, Richard actually looked scared. The polished image he'd spent years perfecting, successful businessman, respected community guy, doting husband, was falling apart right in front of us. He turned toward me, eyes burning. You called them. Margaret calmly stepped between us. I mentioned earlier, this all started with a whistleblower report. Federal investigations don't happen overnight, Richard. This has been in motion for a while. He didn't even reply. Just shoved past the chairs and headed for the exit. But he didn't make it far. The restaurant manager stepped into the room, clearly nervous. Sir, there are some men outside asking for you, he said. Richard stopped mid-stride. He looked back, as if trying to calculate what to do next. 3 men entered the room, all in dark suits. They moved with quiet authority, scanning the scene. The lead agent held up his badge. Richard Thompson, he asked, though his eyes had already locked onto him. That's him, someone said. Richard's lawyer stepped forward. I represent Mr. Thompson, whatever this is about. But the agent didn't stop. Mr. Thompson, we have a warrant for your arrest. Charges include tax evasion, wire fraud, and falsifying federal documents. He pulled a paper from his jacket. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you. The room went still. Richard's face twisted, first disbelief, then anger, then something like panic. He turned to me. You, he said. What did you tell them? I stayed seated. Everything you ever told me, Richard, I said. Every conversation you had in front of me. Every document you left lying around. A second agent came forward with handcuffs. Richard instinctively stepped back. This is a mistake, he said, voice rising. These are complicated business matters. My wife doesn't even understand how any of this works. She understands just fine, the lead agent said, cutting him off. In fact, the evidence she gave us was unusually thorough. A third agent approached with a laptop. Mrs. Thompson, we just need to confirm a few final details, if you're willing. We went over a few transactions. I answered confidently, using the same financial terms Richard once said I'd never understand. Richard just stared at me, stunned. All that time, he said slowly, while you were reading in the corner. All those dinners where you just smiled and nodded. I was paying attention, I said. Something you never did with me. The agents led Richard toward the door. Margaret gathered her papers and walked over to me. You all right? She asked, her voice gentle. I sat there for a second, taking a slow breath, trying to feel where the fear and anger used to be. It felt quiet now. I think I will be, I said. And for the first time in a long while it felt true.